If we try to explain the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, we often interpret it through military defeats, uprisings, and territorial losses. However, behind these events there was a factor at least as decisive as war: financial collapse. In the 19th century, the Ottoman state experienced one of the first major and systematic debt crises of modern history. This crisis was not merely an economic problem, it directly affected the state's sovereignty, decision-making power, and long-term strength. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire still maintained its authority over a vast geography. This territory, stretching across the Balkans, Anatolia, the Middle East, and North Africa, possessed significant potential in terms of population and strategic position. Yet this potential could not be transformed into economic power. European states had industrialized, increased their production capacity, and accumulated capital. The Ottoman economy could not integrate into the global economy because it was largely based on agriculture and operated with low productivity. The state's tax system was not centralized. Most taxes were collected by local administrators, and a significant portion of these revenues never reached the central government due to widespread corruption. Treasury revenues were irregular and insufficient. For many years, the Ottoman state had covered budget deficits by debasing its currency or confiscating the property of wealthy officials. However, with the development of international trade and finance in the 19th century, these methods no longer worked. For a long time, the Ottoman administration avoided borrowing from Europe. Interest was not favorably viewed in Islamic law, and there was also concern about becoming financially dependent on Christian European powers. However, the Crimean War, which began in 1853, changed this stance. Russia's attack on Ottoman territory confronted the empire with enormous military expenses. Britain and France joined the war on the Ottoman side to counterbalance Russia. This support was not only military, but also driven by financial motives. In 1854, the Ottoman state took its first foreign loan from British and French banks. Due to the perceived high risk, this loan came with harsh conditions. The bonds were sold at a discount, meaning the Ottomans did not receive the full nominal value of the debt. Nevertheless, interest payments were calculated on the full amount. This created a permanent burden on Ottoman finances. While the problem appeared temporarily solved, a long-term habit of borrowing began. After the Crimean War ended, the Ottoman administration no longer viewed borrowing as a temporary measure, but as a permanent method of financing. The examples of urbanization and modernization in Europe placed serious pressure on Ottoman elites. State officials pursued large expenditures to compensate for the empire's image of backwardness. However, these expenditures were not directed toward investments that would increase productive capacity, but toward palaces, military equipment, and prestige projects. Dolmabahce Palace is one of the most striking examples of this period. It was built to reflect the splendor of European monarchies. Compared to the state's annual revenues, its construction cost was extraordinarily high and was financed entirely through debt. This spending created serious imbalances in the state budget and increased the need for further borrowing. From the 1860s onward, the Ottoman state began taking new loans simply to pay the interest on old debts. This led to the formation of a debt spiral. An increasingly large portion of state revenues was used for debt servicing. While this ratio was around 15% in the 1860s, it rose to over 50% in the 1870s. This clearly indicated that the state had reached an unsustainable financial point. During this period, the Ottoman administration turned to local financial circles known as the Galata bankers to meet short-term cash needs. These bankers lent money at very high interest rates, further increasing the state's financial burden. Especially during the reign of Sultan Abdulaziz, military expenditures rose sharply. Expensive warships were purchased from abroad for the navy. However, there were no resources to operate this fleet, and many of the ships remained idle in harbors. In 1873, a financial crisis that began in Europe directly affected the Ottoman Empire. European capital contracted, and it became difficult to find new loans. At the same time, a severe drought struck Anatolia. Agricultural production declined, famine emerged, and tax revenues fell rapidly. While state revenues collapsed, debt payments remained unchanged. In 1875, the Ottoman state announced that it would reduce its debt payments. This decision effectively amounted to a declaration of bankruptcy. European investors suffered major losses, and political support for the Ottoman Empire weakened. This economic fragility also negatively affected the empire's military and diplomatic position. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878 was one of the consequences of this weakness. The Ottomans lost the war, and in addition to major territorial losses, were forced to accept a heavy war indemnity. This indemnity further increased an already overwhelming debt burden. As a result of these developments, the Ottoman state became incapable of managing its debts independently. In 1881, following an agreement with European creditors, the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, Duyun-u Umumiye, was established. This institution took direct control of the empire's most reliable revenue sources. Revenues from salt, tobacco, silk, fisheries, and stamp taxes were placed under its authority. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration operated independently of the Ottoman treasury. It had its own staff, its own budget, and its own oversight mechanisms. Most of the collected revenues were transferred directly to creditors, while the Ottoman state attempted to govern with what little income remained. This situation effectively meant the loss of economic sovereignty. Toward the end of the century, Germany gained increasing influence over the Ottoman Empire. The Berlin-Baghdad railway project is one of the most important examples of this process. The project generated new debts and made the Ottomans economically dependent on Germany. The empire had moved from one form of financial dependency to another. Before the First World War, the Ottoman leadership believed that if Germany won, it could escape its debt obligations. For this reason, the empire entered the war on Germany's side. However, the war was lost and the empire collapsed. Despite this, Ottoman debts did not disappear. After the establishment of the Republic of Turkey, Ottoman debts were renegotiated. With the Treaty of Lausanne, a portion of these debts was transferred to the new state. Despite severe economic difficulties, Turkey agreed to repay them. Payments continued for many years, and the final installment of Ottoman debt was paid in 1954. The Ottoman debt crisis is a historical example that shows how economic dependency can erode a state's political independence in the modern world. This process clearly demonstrates that financial sovereignty is at least as important as military and political sovereignty. If this narrative has given you a new perspective, subscribe. History always shows us the truth, but what matters is knowing how to look at it, and I will show you that truth.